Speak Black to me. This is Dr. Mawata Kairi, Kevin Washington. This is about burning down your community.
Music by D-U-D-E.
Speak Black to me. Speak Black to me, a dynamic space of Black discourse where we engage in the process of elevating and transforming the mind. Speak Black to me is a space where we come together to transform and transcend our given condition, to be and to become more powerful. Speak Black to me. The liberated zone of intellect, of insight and inspiration is called Speak Black to me.
As we see the looting taking place in our society on the basis of the protests that gain impetus from George Floyd being choked out by a Minnesota police officer, people are saying, why are they burning down their community? See, in order for it to be your community, you have to have some ownership in that community. You have to not only have ownership, but also the capacity to be able to build and rebuild in that community. You have to be able to have political power in that community. See, what we find in these communities that are called our communities is not simply ownership, but we're finding loanership in these spaces. See, ownership means that you have some level of agency over the property and what goes on that property. Not only does ownership give you that, but it also allows you the opportunity to be able to reap the fruits of that particular land. This is not the case in many of our communities. People of African descent are not owning the lands. When you talk about going into that hair shop or that nail shop that's in the community, the question is, who owns those facilities? Who owns those institutions? Who makes the money off of them? And I will submit to you that they're mostly not people of African descent. So don't come talk about burning down my community when it's not our community. See, the people that own the buildings are the ones that are reaping the fruit from that particular property. It is not being generated in the people. Just because I live on a space doesn't mean that I am ownership of that space. See, ownership means that I have some agency, I have some power in the moment, and I would submit to you that there is little power in the moment. Political power definitely is being taken away because we're talking about gerrymandering, reducing the capacity of individuals to have voting rights in a space. Now, I'm not an advocate highly of voting for a system that continues to oppress a population. Makes no sense to invest a particular interest in something that will be against my personal interest. See, if I'm voting for someone who is sustaining this idea of systemic racism, then I'm voting against myself. Dick Gregory says it very well. He said that if you're voting for the lesser two evils, you're evil. It's still evil. See, we have to be critical, but the point is that this idea of gerrymandering means that I'm being disenfranchised from having agency in a space. So now, one, I don't own the land. I don't reap the fruits from the land, and then I can't make decisions about what goes on the land. And yet you want to suggest to me that it's my community. It's my community when I have ownership, I have agency, I have authority over the land. I'm just simply using the land in the moment. So this moment right now is about people recognizing that they have been disenfranchised for generations. See, sharecropping is not the same thing as owning the land. See, sharecropping means that you simply own the land and you are benefiting someone else. But the very moment people begin to protest and say, oh, don't burn down where you live. Hold on, slick. You are benefiting from my living here. You are benefiting from my buying here. You are benefiting from my maneuvering through this space day in and day out. And yet for generations, my progeny, those that have gone before me as well, don't reap the benefits of the fruit of the land. So are Black people really burning down where they live? Are they burning? Are they tearing up their communities? That's a question. But even associated with that, we see clearly that those who are starting much of this this vandalism that's happening within these communities don't look like the people that they want to blame it on. These are largely people who are going through provoking violence. Some even talk about being agent provocateurs. They are creating a condition where individuals are looking like they are burning down the land. We've seen individuals ride up to other people, some whites in automobiles, ride up to some blacks and give them a brick. We've seen bricks stacked up in communities where bricks have never been before, suggesting that this is what you need to do. Go out and brick so that we can suggest that this is the kind of people that you are. The people that are starting the fires, we clearly see in Minnesota, it was a white male police officer who was going down, starting the fires and breaking out the glass windows. We've seen them spray paint Black Lives Matter, BLM, on sides of buildings, but they're not Black people. They don't like the people who were talking about Black Lives Matter, saying that we are helping you. You're not helping us. Because putting letters on the side of Starbucks doesn't resolve issues for us. There's no beef with Starbucks in the sense of Black Lives Matter. Ownership of Starbucks, yes. There's an issue of racism and oppression. The Starbucks that denied the Black man access to the space in Philly. Oh, that's a real issue. But the beef right now is not about Starbucks. The issue is, where are our bucks? Why do we not have our own coffee houses if we wanted them in our community? Why is it that Starbucks makes a critical decision as to the kind of income that has to be in a space before they build the building? That's an issue. So then people who may even want coffee are denied coffee from a place like Starbucks because they don't make the income. The question is, why did they not make the income? Because of systemic racism and oppression, not having the capacity to generate wealth from the land. Oh yeah. Are people burning down their own communities? It's a question. Are they expressing their dissent? Are they expressing themselves as recognizing that they have not been acknowledged as being human? And now you have to deal with the forces of these voices. See, there was a man named Samuel Cartwright who came up with 2 diagnoses for people of African descent who either stayed on the plantation or ran away from the plantation. One diagnosis was drapetomania. Some talked about dryptomania. It is defined as a fleet from home madness. Drapetes is Greek for flee from home. So here you have an individual who is being severely beaten and who one day says, I'm going to leave this place behind me, and takes off running. And a white psychiatrist says he has a mental disorder called drapetomania. He also had a diagnosis that he would give to those who would stay on the plantation who would appear to be docile, which makes no sense if you're having to do work. But he says it is called dysesthesia ethiopica, which means habitude of mind. See, he said that the nervous system in these people of African descent were not as developed, and so you could beat them more because they did not have the sensitivity as did whites. Interesting that if one stayed on the plantation, they had a disease. And if they left the plantation, they had a disease. My grandmother say, damned if you do, and damned if you don't. And yet, we are asking the question, can these people determine for us what is right, what is human for us? Are we burning down our communities? There is a history of them perpetually labeling people who have a condition to strike out against their oppressor. Samuel Cartwright, they called it drapetomania, flee from home madness. You're not fleeing from no home if it's not your house in the first place. You're not fleeing from home if you're being beaten. It makes sense to get up and leave a place where you're being physically abused. That makes sense to me. You're being burned and you leave your hand on the fire. That makes no sense to just leave your hand on the fire. Take your hand out of the fire. But yet, he said they had drapetomania. They're saying today that they're burning down their community. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. And if you don't burn the community, then they're going to start burning fires for us to suggest that this is what we should be doing. But if you just get out the way, let us handle this business, I think we can get it right. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Very familiar with that. People talk about it all the time. How it went on for 50 years, right? People talk about that often. But the philosophy behind it is rarely ever talked about. See, it was believed that syphilis would ascend up the higher central nervous pathways of whites. But because blacks or people of African descent had not developed as much, then the pathways that it would travel would be to the respiratory system and therefore cause respiratory damage, but not central nervous system damage. Because people of African descent were not necessarily as developed or sophisticated internally. Interesting that syphilis would ascend into the respiratory system. Again, we're talking about breathing, and yet we're choking out somebody today. So even if it did ascend to the respiratory system, why would you not treat men after the treatment had been found or discovered for syphilis? Because you want to choke them out? Some suggest that they wanted to see how it would spread. That means then that you were not addressing black men, that you were attacking the black family, because if syphilis is an STD, sexually transmitted disease, you can't have sex by yourself, with yourself. You got to have sex with somebody else. Therefore, it was an attack on the black family. And if it was about ascending to the respiratory system, therefore you were trying to choke out a whole population. It hasn't changed. You're still choking out people. Somebody speak black to me. So are we really burning down our community? Or are we destroying something else that needs to be destroyed?